Of course, we have a very obvious common theme running through all the readings today, from the first reading until the gospel, and that is the idea of sowing, of growing and harvesting. I mean, the first reading talks about God sending the rain and the snow, his word to the earth, and it waters it. The psalm is seed sown on good ground bears a fruitful harvest. St. Paul, nature's groaning and labor pains, awaiting redemption. And the gospel, the parable of the sower. And so, you know, farming in general is a concept most of us understand. I mean, we live in the big city out here. No, we don't. We have nothing but farms around here. And most of us, a lot of us at least, grew up on farms. So we know what it's like to work in the fields and things like that. And so it's an image that we can immediately bring to mind, where people who live in the city have a harder time doing that because it's something not familiar to them. But for us, it's readily understandable. We know the whole procedure too. Every year we see it all around us and even in our own backyard sometimes. Harvest time comes. After harvest, they plow, and then you dice, then you plant, then you harvest, then you plow, then you dice, then you plant, then you harvest. That's how it goes every year. But while we understand that, we also have to understand the context that in Christ's time in this part of the world, plowing was second. First, they sowed the seed, and then they plowed in order to plow the seed under. So this is an important thing to understand. Most of Christ's hearers, all of them, would have understood this. I mean, some of his own apostles are farmers. Many amongst the disciples farm, and everybody and their uncle, at least in that time, knows something about it because, again, that's how they get their food. McDonald's hadn't made it to Jerusalem yet. So everything is from the earth. And so they understand what he's saying when he talks about the seed falling on various types of ground and either growing or not growing. Because that tells us that that ground was either prepared and plowed after the seed fell or it was not. Okay. The seed that falls on the path, that means that that ground was already hard packed. And he says the birds come and eat the seed up. The devil comes and takes that from the heart of the person. That means that that ground, that field, that person did absolutely nothing to allow God's grace to grow in them. That their minds, hearts, and souls were already so hardened that God's grace could not enter into it, and the devil had an easy time just picking that away. Unfortunately, that happens. If nothing's done to allow the seed to grow, again, God in His goodness, again, context, God in His goodness comes and offers us everything we need. He gives us His scriptures, He gives us His church, He gives us His commandments, He gives us the apostles and the Pope and all these things down to today, the sacraments and all of this. He says, you have all of this. He's sowing the seed. He says, I'm giving you what you need. All you have to do is make sure it has a place to grow. That's it. He sows the seed. The sower goes out and generously gives to all of the parts of the field. That's, again, understand that. He does not say this part doesn't get it or that part doesn't get it. He offers it to every part of that field. But that first part, the path, the heart is so hardened already that they're so set in their ways, be it whatever sin it is or vice, they're so sure of themselves, they're so wrapped up in the world that God's word, God's laws, God's love is not able to grow in them. They've closed it out. And that's why it says the devil just comes along and takes it away. The second one, seed sown among rocky ground. Again, anybody who's grown up on a farm knows that when you find rocks in the field, you have to do what? You have to pick them up and carry them out of the field. Every old field has a pile of rocks somewhere. A lot of the old farms actually have walls made out of rock, or houses even sometimes, because those are field rocks. You had to get them out of the way because rocks impair the ability of that seed to grow. Christ says that the seed sown on the rocky ground, he says, it grows at first, but it dies because it cannot put down roots because something else is taking its place. Those rocks that should have been gotten out when the ground was plowed, whoever was in charge of that spot of the field left them there. And so the seed dies before it can bear any fruit. It grows quick because there's some ground, but it doesn't survive because that vice or that sin, whatever it may be, is so deeply entrenched in that life that it prevents that grace of God from growing roots. The seed sown among thorns, that's another interesting thing. If you have other things growing in your field, what does that mean? That means you didn't plow well at all. If you had plowed well, you would have plowed the thorns up. It's that simple. And because they're there, that means that whoever was plowing that field was negligent and lazy in their work. They didn't put all they had into it. They weren't as concerned as they should have been. They put in some effort, but not all. And so Christ says, when the seed falls on that ground, when the grace of God falls on that ground, it does grow. What happens? Before it can bear fruit, it's choked off by the thorns. Why? Because the thorns had roots that were deeper. They were not plowed out. They were not taken out. So while there was room for the seed to grow for a time, it couldn't bear fruit. Because when push came to shove, who was getting the water, the minerals, the nutrients? The roots that have been there longer are going to get it. And so those thorns choked and killed the grace of God before it could bear fruit. It was looking good for a while, but it just couldn't contend with something that was already firmly rooted. And the seed that falls on good ground will bear fruit, he says. That's ground where the person in charge of plowing has taken the time, taken the effort to break up the hard spots, to pull out the rocks, to make sure the furrows are straight, the thorns have been plowed up. That way the seed has a real chance of growing. And that's all that had to be done, was cooperate. That's all that had to be done, was to cooperate and give that grace of God a chance to grow. And Christ says, if I do my best, he says, if I make sure it has good ground to land on, he says, it will grow. All I have to do is make sure the ground is ready for it. That's all I have to do. And so what we have here is, obviously, you look at these various situations. Last week we spoke a lot about the necessity for obedience in the faith, obedience to the church, obedience to the Pope. That's important because obedience and faith it goes hand in hand. And for instance, you have those thorns that grow up in the field here. That's like what pride is. Pride's just hanging around. It doesn't prevent the seed from growing, notice. Pride doesn't prevent me from having some sort of relationship with God. Pride doesn't totally prevent me from praying at the beginning. But as time goes on, when that grace of God desires to grow and expand and deepen my spiritual life and make me more Christ-like, more humble, what happens? The thorns strangle it. Because now they're fighting for the same piece of ground. And if that pride is already firmly entrenched there, that humility has no chance. Pride will always win when it has roots that deep. And so it's like a series of things. Each part of this field, it happens one after the other. First, the pride grows, the thorns grow. Then what happens? After the thorns are grown, well, a few rocks here and there aren't going to hurt anything, right? As long as the rest of it's okay. A few rocks won't bother anything. Rocks are those vices, those sins that we've become accustomed to. I think we all have them. Whether or not we want to admit it's a whole other story, but the facts are the facts. There's certain vices or sins that we've become accustomed to that we almost want to keep because there's a certain comfort in it that I know how this goes. And giving it up, well, what's going to take that place in my life if I don't have that anymore? How am I going to get through if I don't have that way to deal with it anymore? Whether or not it's good is another story. First, the thorns had to be there. Then the rocks could find some space too. And after the rocks and the thorns have been there long enough, what happens? The ground becomes unsafe for anything good. It becomes like a hardened path. And then the grace of God has no entrance in it at all. That's that series of events that happens if we're not careful. And again, that's why pride is so dangerous. It comes before every single sin. Again, I mentioned it last week, what pride can do. It's always the first one. Pride is the ticket to the Ferris wheel. Pride is the track that the train of sin runs on. It's that first spot where the train gets going. And then at the individual stations later, it goes through all those and picks up baggage as it goes. But that's always how it starts. That's why Christ opposes that and says, I am meek and humble of heart. Humble, humble, humble. Only the humble one is able to put in the effort and ensure that that field is clear, to get rid of those rocks. Christ gives us the sacrament of penance, confession, for a reason. He knows there's rocks in our field. That's why. And he says, if you want to get rid of them, here's where you take them. Here's where they can be left. But if you don't want to take them there, they're going to stay right where you left them. And it's that much less room God's grace has to grow then in your life. Again, pride enabled the rocks to stay. Because the rocks stayed, well, then it just becomes normal sin to me. And then the field gets hard. The ground becomes so tightly compact, there's no space for anything else. So we think about the fact that Christ in his goodness keeps sowing the seed, waiting for us to respond. We look at the farms around us. Now, we have a lot of decent sized farms in the area. You look at all the crops that are growing out there, and those crops are never meant to feed just that one family. They feed hundreds, if not thousands, of others. But if that farmer doesn't put in the work, the crops don't grow. But the effect affects hundreds and thousands of other people. And that's just in a purely material sense. In a spiritual sense, you think about it, if the farm, my mind, heart, and soul, is not prepared, is not allowing God's grace to go, what's going to happen? Virtue will not grow within me. And that's going to affect many, many other people throughout my life. In situations where I could have gone in with virtues, patience, love, mercy, forgiveness, all these things, temperance, courage, justice, fortitude, everything. I could have gone in with those, and I don't have them because my field wasn't plowed. On the other hand, if we're doing that, if we're making sure the field is plowed and ready and receptive to God, then I can help hundreds, if not thousands, of other people in my lifetime do the same thing. I can show them how they can make this happen. I can show them this is how you make that seed grow. This is how you can allow it to happen. If you want to learn how to farm, where are you going to go? To the farm that has fields that are overgrown with thorns? I hope not. I hope not. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. To the field that's overgrown with thorns, or to the field that has full of wheat and corn? Which farmer are you going to want to learn from? The one who has piles of rocks all over the place and keeps breaking his plow? Or the one who goes out there and you see the straight, long rows that are totally ready for the seed to grow in? And so, which kind of vision, which kind of farm am I for God's grace? Am I the one others can learn from, or the ones others say don't be like them? Again, so be on the watch always for pride. Nothing wrong with being proud of my accomplishments, my abilities. I should be proud of those things. They're gifts from God. But pride can be dangerous in the sense that it starts to put me above everything else. My ideas, my thoughts, my desires. And then those weeds slowly, those thorns strangle the fruit that was about to grow.